good evening. Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About Mental Health. I'm Nels Kloster. I'm an addiction psychiatrist. I work in Southern Vermont.
And my name is Robert Stack. I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, licensed mental health counselor. Good evening.
We've been kind of looking at the news the last couple of shows and commenting on things.
Yeah, real current events. And I just want to mention today, I was reading an article in the Boston Globe, and it was about the heroin and gun exchange that goes on between Massachusetts, Western Mass, and Vermont, and people trading guns for heroin, and the concerns that law enforcement had. It was a good article. It was a quite lengthy one, so if anybody's interested, that was in today's Boston Globe. But you know, there's so many different aspects to this opiate problem. You know, there's so many other pieces involved. So it was top of the page, front page, you know, on the Globe.
That's an aspect I hadn't even thought of. The idea that the drugs are cheaper in Massachusetts, so therefore you bring them up to Vermont and you're able to charge more for them, for that sort of effort to do that. But that gun laws are more liberal in Vermont and guns are cheaper, so therefore you take them down south to Massachusetts and sell them for more there. So there's this sort of, you know, back and forth of these two commodities that are also intimately linked to each other.
Right, and the lead-in story was that unfortunate incident with the man that shot somebody in town here, and it talked about that, and some of the arrests on Route 91 and some of that trafficking and stuff. But again, it's just like you look at the paper in the morning, you go down and there's a headline, you know, and it's like, God. Anyway.
Yeah, no, these issues are really catching a lot of attention, and unfortunately a lot of action too. Right. And I mean, speaking of that, you know, taking action as well. So what's in the headlines? You told me the New York Times, right? That article about you know, naloxone or naltrexone. You know, the idea is that the state passed an act, sort of Good Samaritan sort of an act that would allow people to administer, you know, naltrexone or naloxone, which is an agonist or sort of an antidote to you know, opiate overdoses. And so if the idea is if you know, live with somebody who's prone to this or in that sort of environment, that when they've overdosed and stopped breathing, you can lose critical time by calling 911, waiting for them to respond, maybe doing you know, CPR, which is you know, basically just you know, biding time, that you would be able to administer this medication as antidote and then reverse the effects of the opiate, you know, heroin quite often, which is, you're knocking out the receptors so it no longer suppresses breathing. So people start to breathe and they come to, and that way you've bought some time for rescue crews to come and take them to the emergency department.
Right.
Yeah. But the really disturbing thing about this sort of ties into what we've been talking about lately about the political clout of the pharmaceutical companies, and you know, harkening back to Robert Whitaker as our guest in Anatomy of an Epidemic, that all of their efforts not necessarily in the interest of our health. Now, this particular one, clearly it's in the interest of our health to have naltrexone to be able to administer to overdose patients. The pricing was actually ridiculous. I mean, they developed a special pen to administer something like an EpiPen, and they were going to charge $500 per pen for this, versus the nasal formulation of this, which is $42, you know, per administration, which, as the Times article said, was still prohibitive for a lot of you know, rescue departments, fire departments, individuals, and organizations. Versus then what one of the street workers in a major city had said was, look, it costs $3.
Right.
You know, a needle, you draw it up, it's like basting a turkey for its simplicity, and you jab the needle in the arm and you squeeze, and then for $3 you've saved a life. So it really brings up an interesting question of, you know, what are we paying for and how much do we pay for? And this just brought it to a head.
Yeah, you know, when I first heard about this, there was a federal grant, and they were doing it through needle exchanges. And I think one of the first ones were in San Francisco. And one of the problems they had was that if you're shooting up with somebody, and the person ODs, what do you do with them? And so there's always been these tales
right?
of, or you know, if you call, you know, you get in trouble, or you drop them off in front of an emergency room and keep moving. And so, as a matter of fact, there's been some laws passed that if you call the police for someone who's OD, you won't be prosecuted.
Right.
And I think that was down in Massachusetts. And like I said, some of the other people were talking about giving Nortrexone and the needles out to addicts, letting them get it as a prescription, if you will, and that would be helpful. And all that sounded okay. You know, I didn't have any objection to it. You know, I don't want addicts to die. You know, and it sounded fairly straightforward. But the scary thing about that article in the Times yesterday was more that they want to rename it. I think it was NZO or ENZI or something like that. And then they want to put it like a computer, and it has a voice about how to do the injection, and that's what's going to make it more expensive and more fancy. And to me, it was sort of just an example of like, okay, you have this very simple thing that you want to do. You don't have to teach addicts how to shoot up. They know how to shoot up.
Right.
You don't need anything like that. You stick the needle, you know, and the idea is pretty straightforward. But like you just said, the article made it really clear that this idea was not so much, well, some of it was how to save lives, but there's somebody in the article that's quoted to say, it's really about also returning the investment to the company.
Well, and not even, if you look at sort of, you know, typical commerce, you look at what your costs of production are, then you know, you put a reasonable profit onto that, and then you set your price. And there's a level where there's, you know, enough production makes it worthwhile to produce that. The price setting, though, for this, and they also brought it up in relation to other pharmaceuticals as well, has nothing to do with the cost of manufacture. I mean, the pharmaceutical companies often bring up for you that, oh, there's a cost of research and development, it's a long process, you know, FDA approvals, this and that, but when you look into it, a large chunk of this is about the marketing. And you know, paying a sales force, you know, paying doctors to come out speaking in favor of this. So it really doesn't have so much to, it's divorced from our typical ideas of what it takes to bring a product to market and charging a reasonable amount. They are essentially charging what the market will bear.
Right.
They're naming a price, and people are paying it with any kinds of questions. And their calculations have nothing to do with what's a reasonable return. It has to do with how much money can we possibly pull in for this new medication.
Right. And in the article, they actually talked about the new medication for hepatitis C, which is really encouraging. I mean, you know, a lot of people got hep C,
Right.
not even know they had it.
The current medications are a real butt kicker, for lack of a better word. You feel like the flu, you get sick, you get depressed, really taxing treatment.
So they have a new one, but the problem is they're going to charge $86,000. I think that's the number they use, and that's a 6-week treatment. And they said, well, balance it against the rest of the lifetime, you know, and I guess that's okay. But like you said, the money that they're charging is not necessary, other than they think this is what we can charge. This is what we can charge to, you know, for someone for this medicine. So I don't know. It just, I say this every week almost. It seems like, you know, I'm so hoping that, you know, if we get single payer in Vermont, that one of the things that we look at is, you know, medicine and which ones are approved, which ones are used. You know, we can negotiate the price. As you mentioned, I think when we were talking about it, the whole thing about going to Canada to get medicine cheaper and stuff. I mean, I'm just hoping that it isn't just a matter of cheapness, but also a matter of getting good care.
Well, you know, exactly. It's not just a matter of cheapness, because if you look at what the international comparisons for you know, quality of healthcare, for overall healthcare, the U.S. ranks 36th in the world. It's hard to imagine 35 countries that deliver better healthcare than we do, and it looks like, you know, how much is delivered for the buck, the equitable distribution of healthcare, life expectancy as well. So a lot of, you know, factors would be considered to be a good basic, you know, good health for people, and the really upsetting thing about not just that we're 36 internationally, some important indicators like 39th for infant mortality, which means there are 38 countries who have more children living to 1 year old than the U.S. does, 37th in life expectancy. But we spend more per capita and a greater percentage of our gross domestic product on our health care than any other country in the world. So we're spending more money, and we're in 36th, 37th place overall. We're spending a good 50% more than any other countries at our level of development and economy.
Right. We could go on about this. I mean, you know, obviously somebody would say, well, where would you like to go for your health care, you know, here or there? I don't know. But I'm just saying that, you know, I hope we do continue to work with that.
I'd like to go to Canada. I'd like to go to Singapore. I would like to go to any number of European countries. There's the answer right there for where I'd rather go for health care for my patients and myself.
All right, we have a couple questions tonight. I think they're in some ways they're provocative. I mean, I think they're hoping to
get a rise out of us, right? After what we've talked about with marijuana on this show and being against the legalization of marijuana.
So why not decriminalize all drugs?
And you know, to be provocative right back, sure, why not? Why not? Right, why not? We could, and again, maybe we should make the distinction that decriminalization is not the same thing as legalization. You know, legalization is saying no penalties, you know, no limits, determining what sort of sales mechanisms are, what the restrictions are, like cigarettes and alcohol being legal. But decriminalization, and also another term called depenalization, do not make it legal. They have fines that are part of this, and folks often point to, well, you know, why should I be able to drink and get cirrhosis? Why should I be able to smoke and get lung cancer? And I can't smoke marijuana and just have pleasure in my own home. You know, Portugal might be an interesting example of this, because what they've done is they've decriminalized all drugs, heroin, cocaine. What they have done, though, is interesting, is they've set limits on what is considered personal consumption versus what you would consider to be sales, which is kind of murky, you know, concept here. But a lot of times, court cases around heroin possession boil down to, was this enough for personal use versus is this enough to supply somebody else? So, you know, 100 bags might be kind of iffy territory. 1,000 bags, clear slam dunk. You know, 2 or 3 bags, sure, personal consumption. So they've set levels for you know, amphetamines, for cocaine, for marijuana, for heroin, and they said if you're below this level, that's personal consumption. They then sort of put you through a process where you meet with counselors, you meet with a judge, I believe, and discuss, you know, is this an issue? Offer you counseling, explore that with you, and then, you know, you're set free. Pay your fine and you go. And then if it becomes a larger issue, you know, many visits, or if you have larger amounts, then it's a whole difference in the judicial system. But they found that they're saving a lot of money on legal fees, incarcerations. They've not become this international destination for drug use tourists. And so, you know, there's the question, you know, why not? You know, one short answer might be because we're Puritans and we have a very sort of black and white view of drugs and their use and their misuse.
I'll only say, I mean, and I know I've said this before, that one time somebody said it would, if you increase the amount, or if you make it easier for people to get access to drugs, you will increase the usage. Now, a lot of people think, well, there's a lot of usage already, but it would increase incrementally. I mean, it would increase as there was more drugs in our society. And if you took away the penalties, there would probably be even more use of it. And I guess that's a person's individual choice. And as they grow older, they have a right to choose how they want to live their lives. The only thing I heard one time, and I was struck by it, because, I mean, I guess I agree with him. He said, I worry about people who are at risk or lower income, people who are really, who could not make a choice about recreational use, who for whatever reason, genetic or economic, environmental, would be at increased risk for substance dependency. And you know, are you going to then begin a subpopulation of people who are already addicted. Now, you know, part of me wants to say, well, that's already happening. You know, we have high levels of addiction in different areas of the country. We have high levels of alcoholism. But you know, you know, when they decide that the war is over, you know, that the war on drugs is over, and we're going to figure out how to treat everybody, and we're going to decide that, you just wonder, well, how do you do this? I mean, like you just said, you know, it seems arbitrary. You say, well, alcohol is a terrible drug. It's very, you know, causes lots of problems, medical problems, traffic accidents,
social problems.
It's legal. Nicotine is not a very good drug. I mean, it, you know, pretty much clearly it causes cancer and emphysema. It's something that we need to worry about. So, I mean, you know, and then you start comparing, like, what's more harmful or less harmful. So I know that question was sort of just, you know, in your face kind of, you know, why not do it all? But I guess you can have a legitimate discussion about it. I mean, on some level. But I guess I'm an old guy, and I would sort of be really careful about making drugs available, having more drugs available in our society than is already available.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, again, I mean, I agree with you on that point, and in that way, the legalization is not the way to go. Right. So like we talked about last week, I would not be pleased to see Vermont follow the path of Colorado and Washington. Let's let them work this out. Let's let them, you know, figure out that the tax revenues won't pay for the other costs that are a part of this. And again, you got to sort of extrapolate from other places, but in areas that have tried this, decriminalization does not appear, with marijuana, does not appear to have led to an increase in use. Now, whether that stays that way over the long term, you know, who knows? But you know, at one point we have to probably agree that what's being done now isn't really working all that well.
Right. The Vermont legislature last week, I think, approved a study for the impact of marijuana for revenue. And it was very clear that's the only thing they wanted to consider is what would be the impact for revenue. Well, what do you think they're going to find out? They're going to find out, well, if we taxed them and, you know, looking at Colorado, they're talking about how much money they're making, you know. They'll tell you how many millions of dollars they'll go into state coffers, you know, I mean, and you say, okay, that sounds good, you know, we'll make $3 million selling pot, you know. I don't know, we got $1 billion budget here. I don't know if that's really what we need to do, but you know, I feel almost like we're fighting a tide at this point. I mean, it's sort of, it's going to do what it's going to do. It's going to go in or out or whatever it's going to do, and I don't think there's much I can do about it.
Yeah, I just get the thought there's not a lot of thoughtfulness to it. And like you were saying, even with, you know, the decriminalization, with whichever substance you do it for, you know, there are the balances. Do we want to pay this money for Department of Corrections, you know, judicial system? Balance that out against then the vulnerable people who we know there are vulnerable people who will be harmed by this. Will we be able to care for them? Will those losses, will they pale in comparison to the saved cost and the overall better health? Hard to say. There are people smarter than us who are still trying to figure this out.
We'll see how this turns out.
I hope so, yeah.
All right, next question. I have depression and alcoholism. Is there one medication that covers them both?
Well, I could go in a number of directions with this one. Yeah, you're smiling. I mean, this hits on a couple of things that we've been talking about, you know, privately for months, if not for years. I mean, sure, we could say yes or no. You know, you could. Probably not one medication, no. 2 medications, sure, one for each. Yeah, for each. There's the quick, easy answer. But, you know, there's this idea of co-occurring disorders, right? Mm-hmm. You know, dual disorders, co-occurring disorders, which is the idea that, well, on the one hand, you have all the psychiatric diagnoses, depressions, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and everything in the DSM-4. Alcoholism, opiate dependency, you know, drug addictions, they are included in the DSM-4 as well. However, because of our sort of our archaic way of looking at addiction as an ethical, moral issue, it has remained as sort of a subset in that. So the idea is that there's drug stuff and all the other stuff. And if you have one of these drug disorders and, you know, qualify for one of these other disorders, then you get to be all kind of co-occurring disorders or dual disorders. And, you know, that's been going, I mean, I learned of this, was introduced about 10 years ago. So I'm sure it's been on for 15 or 20 years as a concept. And initially it sounds smart, right? Okay, we're going to, people who use are depressed or anxious, that is a setup for their drug use. And therefore we should treat all these things equally. You know, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about this whole idea of self-medication, right? I'm medicating myself with heroin or with alcohol because I'm depressed or because I'm anxious. But, you know, I think my concern, I've fallen out of love with this whole idea of co-occurring disorders because what I've seen for the mainstream, I mean, certainly if you're someone with schizophrenia who's injecting heroin, they have a serious level of both of those. You need a very encompassing plan. But I have found that this idea of co-occurring disorders leads most of my patients to say, well, you know what, I need a medication for that before I can engage in really serious work on my recovery. So I've seen over and over again that what it does is it gives people an out from acknowledging what a serious issue addiction is for them and the need to take a very proactive stance in the recovery from addiction and to say, well, I can't do that right now because I'm depressed and you need to give me a pill to make that better.
Yeah. My first impulse, I mean, when I read it, I chuckled. You know, there's two ways of thinking about it. One would be you could have antabuse, which makes people sick when they drink, and you could mix it with, let's say, Prozac. Sure. And so there's your pill for both, right? But I think what they're thinking about is probably more like Suboxone, which is a couple of weeks ago somebody says, why do we treat opiates addiction with an opiate and we don't treat alcoholism with alcohol? But I will tell you that I imagine these big pharmaceutical companies, they've seen how much money Suboxone's made. And I'm sure people out there are thinking now, is there a way for us to give alcoholics the euphoric effect of some benzodiazepine effect?
Yeah, Xanax, for example.
At the same time have a blocker, you know what I mean? At the same time have a blocker. And so, you know, I mean, this idea that you could take a pill that you can't get drunk on, but it would mimic your first 4 beers or something. I don't know, you know, how you ever want to think about it. But, and then maybe, I don't know, include some antidepressant qualities to it. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm just making this up. But, I mean, I think that's what they're thinking about. You know, if I can have something that, you know, make me feel good, and that will help with my depression. Because as you were saying, when I was working and, you know, I would hear clients say, you know, they're self-medicating their dual disorders, and that's always sort of worrisome for me because that gives yourself permission to use, and it's this idea that, you know, who could deny me my medicine? Right. And I'm not drinking or doing drugs to get high. I'm doing it to relief of my symptoms, and there might be some relief of symptoms, but it's not medicine. But it is a good way to justify the use. It is a good way to justify. And the sad thing is, as you were mentioning all those other psychiatric symptoms, a lot of them, one of the symptoms like PTSD might be substance abuse. One of the symptoms of any number of illnesses may have substance abuse in there as one possible symptom. And so, you know, it's almost as if people have already put those two together, that, you know, and therefore, and I think one of the problems, and I'm just guessing at this, is that some people still believe that if they treat the psychiatric illness, that the alcoholism and drug addiction will go away. And I don't know if that's really what that was asking either. Is there a chance that I could have an antidepressant drug, and if I wasn't depressed anymore, I wouldn't drink anymore? And I don't think that's true at all. I mean, I'm pretty clear about that. At least I used to be. That, you know, if you have a dual disorder, taking care of one and not the other. Taking care of one doesn't eliminate the other. Let's put it that way.
And the latest thing that I read, trying to look at is there causality, right? I mean, not the sort of chicken-egg debate, but that does depression lead to alcoholism, or does alcoholism lead to depression? And these researchers felt that it was the alcoholism that led to depression. They said when you look at all the people who are alcoholic and the percentage of those who are I got this right. If you look at the percentage of people who are depressed, how many of them have alcohol problems? relatively low percentage. Whereas you look at the people with alcoholism who then report that they're depressed, much higher percentage there. So looking at that and the mechanisms, people start to think, well, maybe really that sort of shoots down the whole self-medication approach.
Right.
No, and again, what a lot of us are saying, you're drinking because you're an alcoholic. And my feeling, having focused on addiction for these years, is that these addictions by themselves come with a whole host of issues and problems. I mean, they are sort of depressants in the brain. They lead to decreased function. They lead to physical discomfort. They lead to social issues. They lead to losing relationships. Their withdrawal symptoms cause anxiety and physical distress. By themselves, that's enough to explain these depressed symptoms. And the diagnoses of depression and anxiety are such a sort of smattering of descriptors, such as being anxious, lacking motivation, having appetite problems, concentration issues, that these could also be applied to addiction itself. So I think it's a false sort of, you know about lumping and splitting, I think it's a false sense of splitting that we can discern and know this is a thing called depression, whereas this is a thing called alcoholism. I think that all this list of symptoms could very easily be incorporated in our addiction and then not sort of, split these things off and then minimize then what is the impact and what is the work needed and responsibility for treating addiction.
And last but not least, and we'll get to the next question, is that the mindset is there a medication for me? I mean, I think that's, that's so telling. And I mean, I'm old school. I'm 12-step programs, abstinence, and even depression. There's other ways of dealing with depression, or, at least, talk therapy, change, different things that you can do. But the idea is that maybe there's a medication I can take for this, And I think in some ways that's become the mindset of a lot of people, that there must be a medication for this.
Yeah, the pharmaceutical industry has done a disservice to healthcare. They have done a disservice to consumers to get people to think this is all about a medication. You can find the right pill. Yeah. Most pills are not good for most things they're prescribed for. Low to moderate levels of depression don't seem to respond to antidepressants. Severe levels do. If you're going to your primary care doctor and saying you're depressed and you're still going to work, you're not depressed enough to warrant a medication, yet you're getting prescribed them. So we've really been bamboozled on the effectiveness of medications, and I think that ties into this idea of self-medicating and dual disorders, co-occurring disorders too. I mean, I could go on forever about this, but I think there's a very strong connection here.
Yeah, yeah. Last but not least, there was a question that came in, and we're going to talk more about it next week. It was, is spirituality a necessity for recovery?
Right, essential to recovery.
And I think what they're referring to is the 12-step programs that, AA and NA believe in a higher power, and spirituality is definitely a part of it. Fellowship is part of it, being with other people. Service work, helping others, but also spirituality. It's a spiritual program. I would say yes, I guess so. I mean, if you want to talk strictly from an AA approach, spirituality is part of recovery, and it's probably essential. But it doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time. And it isn't so much, it's like a benefit of recovery, if you will. Yeah. And for a lot of people, it's just the beginning. Now, next week, we're going to have Dr. Leslie Fisherman.
Right, she's a friend of ours from way back.
Friend of ours from years ago. Yeah. And I'm hoping that she'll come and talk a little bit about pain, because I sat in a workshop she did on pain one time. I was just blown away. It was just so coherent and so...
And spirituality, too. So she is so expert in both of these areas that it can be really hard for us to sort of pick one over the other.
That's right. And so I'm hoping that she'll be willing to talk a little bit about that. We both had the privilege of hearing her talking at St. Michael's about this, and it was just amazing. I went back a second time to hear it again. I mean, really, it's just very, very
because
good.
Because spirituality is part of our...
forward to it.
It's part of our overall wellness.
That's right. So, anyway, well, listen, this has been great. Thank you very much for your questions, and again, your comments, and please send them in, any comments you have. And thank you. That's my camera.
That would be my camera.
His, and this is our
camera. I've learned to work the camera. And when I notice at the corner of my eye, oh, that's my face on the camera, then I try to kind of work the camera a little bit more. Like, I'm an expert.